Welcome everyone to Zoom Palestine on today, March 19th. We commemorate the invasion of Iraq by the United States. And we look at this event, at its history, and in particular in its relationship to the effect that the invasion of Palestine had on, the invasion of Iraq had on Palestinians. So we will read from an excellent paper by Juan Cole that's available on the internet with much background information. But meanwhile, we will listen to some beautiful, the national anthem of Palestine and Iraq. So I'm going to share that with you in a minute through screen sharing, and we will begin with this beautiful national anthem. And I'm going to adjust my all of my phone, where I'm also recording this on Facebook Live. So here's our beautiful anthem, the national anthem of Palestine and Iraq.
الجلال والجمال والسناء والبهاء في رباك والحياة والنجاة والهناء والرجاء في هواك هل أراك سالما منعما وغانما مكرما سالما منعما وغانما مكرما هل أراك في علاك تبلغ سماك موطني الشباب لن يكل همه أن تستقل أو يبيد نستقي من الردى ولن نكون للعدا كالعبيد لا نريد ذلنا المؤبد وعيشنا المنكد لا نريد بل نعيد مجدنا التليد موطني
How beautiful. The welcome everyone to Zoom Palestine, and we will be investigating in today's program the relationship between the events that happened in 2003, 9 years ago, with the invasion of Iraq, and how this impacted Palestine. As we're watching another invasion, this time Russia invading Ukraine, it evokes memories of this horrific event that had a profound impact on Palestinians, that many people are not aware of all the relationships between Iraq and Palestine that was where they impacted. What happened in each one of them impacted the other from the very beginning of Palestine. So we're going to go back in history. Nawal, welcome Nawal on Facebook Live. So what we're going to do is one of my favorite media people, Mahdi Hassan, has on his Mehi, not Mahdi, Mehi Hassan, talked about the relationship between the war invasion of Ukraine and the invasion of Iraq. And that's why I like him very much. He connects the dots. So we're going to listen to what he has to say about how these events connect. So here is the Mehdi Hassan show, and entitled Russia's War Echoes US Invasion of Iraq.
What is going on in Ukraine? In recent days, we have turned to history to try to better understand the context of this current conflict. On this show, we looked at the Soviet war in Afghanistan, Putin's war in Chechnya. We even looked at NATO's no-fly zones in Bosnia and Libya. But tonight, we're going to begin by addressing the elephant in the room, a topic that's made everything a little awkward when discussing Russia's invasion of Ukraine. I'm talking, of course, about the US invasion of Iraq in 2003. Now, stay with me. I'm not saying tonight that the US war in Iraq somehow justifies or excuses Vladimir Putin's war on Ukraine, or that we should talk about Iraq instead of Ukraine. That is called whataboutism. It's what the Russian government does so well, and what we're not going to do tonight. But to pretend there aren't obvious comparisons or analogies between those two conflicts, or more importantly, lessons to be learned from Iraq, both by Russia and by the United States in our current moment of crisis, is to put your head in the sand. So let's just remind ourselves how it all started.
At this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger. On my orders, coalition forces have begun striking selected targets of military importance to undermine Saddam Hussein's ability to wage war. These are opening stages of what will be a broad and concerted campaign.
From there, we'd see the first US attacks on Iraq in March of 2003, using an overwhelming display of military strength. The US led a, quote, shock and awe ground and air campaign, the likes of which hadn't been seen in generations. People thought Iraq would be a cakewalk for the US, just as Putin clearly believed his invasion of Ukraine would be pretty similar. The US framed its invasion as a liberation of the Iraqi people, literally calling it Operation Iraqi Freedom. And today, Russia is framing Putin's assault on Ukraine in exactly the same way, an assault to save Ukrainians, even as their own country is being demolished by Russia. And in the case of both wars, we have they have WMDs argument employed as an all-purpose and dishonest justification for war.
The facts and Iraq's behavior show that Saddam Hussein and his regime are concealing their efforts to produce more weapons of mass destruction.
Remember that iconic, if shameful, moment? Colin Powell held up a tiny vial of white powder representing Saddam Hussein's supposed stockpile of anthrax to make the threat of biological warfare that much more visible and urgent.
This is evidence, not conjecture. This is true. This is all well documented.
The moment has become so notorious that Putin cited it on the day of his own invasion of Ukraine last month, saying in his address, and I quote, "There is a special place for the invasion of Iraq, which was carried out also without any legal grounds as a pretext in front of the eyes of the whole world. The US Secretary of State shook some kind of a test tube with white powder, assuring everyone that this is a chemical weapon being developed in Iraq. It was a hoax, a bluff." And yet, now we're seeing Russia resort to its own WMD hoax, albeit after its invasion, not before, propagating an unsubstantiated biological weapons scare to try and justify a wholly illegal, brutal, and unprovoked invasion after the fact. One that has, by the way, created Europe's largest refugee crisis since World War II, with more than 3 million Ukrainians displaced by the war, just as the US invasion of Iraq created, according to the UN, the largest refugee crisis in the Middle East since the displacement of the Palestinians in 1948. We all now recognize that the invasion of Iraq was a disaster for the United States, for the world, and of course for Iraqis. It was a war built on a tissue of lies and led to a nationalist insurgency that ended with an ignominious US withdrawal. Is that what Putin now faces in Ukraine? Remember, the Russian president actually opposed the US going into Iraq in 2003, which unfortunately for him makes him a massive hypocrite today, to say the least. And then there's our own position. Those of us who point out that we violated international law, we killed civilians, we birthed an insurgency, aren't doing it because we want to distract from Ukraine. No, on the contrary, it's because we wish America had more credibility on the global stage to condemn Russia for its invasion. And we wish we hadn't given a cynical, ruthless, amoral autocrat like Putin and his Chinese allies a stick with which to beat us. I mean, just listen to Secretary of State Antony Blinken on Ukraine today.
When I tell you that there will be accountability and consequences for any war crimes that have been committed, I hope you'll take me at my word, but actions always speak louder than words.
I agree with him. We all should. We shouldn't let Russia get away with war crimes. We should hold them to account. But I'm not going to lie to you either. There was no holding to account for the war crimes we committed in Iraq, whether it was bombing hospitals, bombing media organizations, torturing people. If you want to see how bad our brazen memory holding of Iraq has been in this country, just watch this exchange on this network on the subject of Ukraine. You may not believe your eyes or ears.
Well, and I have argued that when you invade a sovereign nation, that is a war crime. I mean, I think we're at just a real basic point there.
Well, it is certainly against every principle of international law and international order. And that's why throwing the book at them now in terms of economic sanctions and punishments is also a part of it. And I think the world is there. Certainly NATO is there. He's managed to unite NATO in ways that I didn't think I would ever see again after the end of the Cold War.
The channel that helped give us the Iraq War, interviewing an architect of that Iraq War on how bad it is to invade sovereign countries. You cannot make this stuff up. Now, let me be clear. There are also significant differences between the invasions of Iraq and Ukraine. For all the lies the US told, and this isn't any kind of justification, but the US, a democracy, a flawed democracy, but a democracy, toppled a brutal dictator responsible for the massacres of hundreds, maybe thousands of people in Iraq. Hundreds of thousands of members of minority communities. In Ukraine, it's the reverse. A brutal dictator trying to topple a functioning, if flawed, democracy with a popularly elected president. Nor was America trying to annex Iraq in 2003 or deny its existence as a country in the way that Russia is now doing with Ukraine. So I'm not saying these are like-for-like scenarios. And I'm certainly not saying we in America shouldn't be loudly condemning Russia's invasion of Ukraine because of our own invasion of Iraq. Not at all. That would be whataboutism. And as I said, we're not doing that here. What Putin should have learned from Iraq, though, a war he opposed, is that there are limits to what you can do with your mighty weapons and big armies. We couldn't win in Iraq. That war exposed America's weakness on the world stage and undermined our moral standing. Now, Russia didn't have much of a moral standing on the world stage to begin with, but it was seen as powerful, strong, mighty. Maybe no longer. Maybe the war in Ukraine has revealed the Russian bear to be more of a paper tiger. Listen to what this Iraqi man told Al Jazeera last month as he was watching the war in Ukraine unfold. Quote, Saddam, Bush, and Putin, they are all dogs, he said. And if Putin could learn anything from Iraq, that is, this will be the beginning of his end.
Yes, I think that was so excellent. Kudos to him for having the only show that I've seen that really makes these points so clearly. Now I want to show you another video. Where is it? Here on what happened to the Palestinians during the invasion of Iraq.
The general public has not yet heard of this refugee camp in the
I'm going to start it again.
Public has not yet heard of this refugee camp in the no man's land between Jordan and Iraq. No one has ever filmed here. For 3 months, Palestinians expelled from Iraq have been living here. They were allowed to live in Iraq by Saddam Hussein, sufficient grounds now for expulsion and lynch mob justice. The Iraqi border crossing in the east, and behind this tent to the west, the border with Jordan. In the desert, it is so hot, even at night, that many refugees sleep in the open. Refugees gather here to wash. There is quite literally nothing left in the tank. Palestinian Abu Nawaf comes from Haifa and was expelled from there during the Arab-Israeli War in 1948. He fled to Iraq and managed to forge a successful career as a writer. He has, not unusually amongst Muslims, 2 wives, 5 sons, and a daughter. His second wife is 7 months pregnant. The remaining members of his large family are scattered across camps in Jordan and Baghdad. Refugee Nawaf grants these cats asylum in his tent.
Now the situation in Iraq is very serious. You know, there's no order. One cat may be killed in the street. Everything is in Iraq now. It's different from the days before. Everything is in chaos. Something fragile is happening in Iraq. For myself, I can not go back to Iraq because I feel my life is in danger.
Why is your life in danger?
Anyone can give 100 pounds or dollars to another killer to kill me, because some of them are very extremists, and because I am a Palestinian, they would say he's Palestinian. He was support of the Saddam regime, and so we must get rid of him.
We arranged to visit Nawaf's sons in Baghdad the next day in order to build up a picture of the situation for Palestinians in Iraq. Nawaf gave us a letter to give to his sons. New refugees arrive at the camp and have to be fed. The water bottles are wrapped in wet sacking. The evaporation takes the heat, cooling the contents. For 3 months, the camp's inmates have consumed nothing but corned beef and tinned beans. Finally dusk after a hot day. In the tent, they are celebrating Al-Namzawi, the Austrian, who had come finally to document their situation on camera. They have pinned a lot of hope on these pictures, probably too much. We're traveling on the motorway towards Baghdad, 550 kilometers of desert with a village and 2 petrol stations. We stop at the first just in case. 2.5 hours long wait. The fact that the man at the petrol pump is calmly smoking a cigarette doesn't bode well. He informs us that there is no petrol. Here, even intensive praying does not help. We drive like many others off the motorway to look further for a petrol station. Maybe Allah heard the prayers. In any case, we found an antiquated pump and filled all our jerry cans. With 100 litres in the tank, canisters and bottles, we drive on the 15 hours to Baghdad. At first sight, the town does not appear as destroyed as the usual television pictures would lead you to believe. There is no electricity. The air rings with the ear-splitting sound of emergency generators. Water, which doesn't reach any of the houses, floods the streets from bullet-ridden water pipes. We visit Nawaf's son's house, Khalid Nawaf, who studied management and is currently a cook. He plays with his children in the room. They are not allowed to play in the street, too dangerous.
I hope to leave this country because it isn't safe. Especially we are Palestinians. Then we are in risk case. Where do you go? In any country. To live in any country to live in safe. Especially Palestine. I want to see Palestine.
The brothers run a snack bar on the corner. The neighbors like them, and so far, nothing of incident has happened. The existence of 20 family members depends on the little shop. The menu is modest. There are only 2 dishes, both cooked fresh. Today, falafel is being prepared. The chickpea balls are popular in England too. Only here they cost 50 cents each. For the price of one at home, we could buy a whole sackful in Iraq. They are cooked with propane gas, which is also slowly becoming scarce. It takes about an hour until the falafel are ready. And always present, the Palestinian conflict.
My grandfather came to Baghdad, then to Syria. My father was born. When he grew, go to Syria, then to Kuwait, then to Egypt, then to Libya. I'm his big son. I was born in Baghdad. My brother born in Kuwait. My brother born in Syria. And I have another born in Kuwait and Syria. And 14 Arabian countries.
It drives us to the Palestinian district in the middle of Baghdad.
Want to know how to get rid of your toe fungus for good? Then you must see this. Top medical doctor shows a 50.
More than 6,000 family lives in this house.
More than 6,000.
Behind this house, there is a camp. This camp, there is many Palestinian family in the community.
Khalid shows us a banner on the camp wall. Already someone has been shot. This time a doctor was hit.
Accident. Accident. Shooting by someone.
Behind this wall on one of Baghdad's sports grounds, the UNHCR has set up a camp for those fleeing their own country. Khalid takes us to his friend Akram Asaf. With his whole family, he has found refuge in this tent. His fate is typical of Palestinians in post-war Iraq. I have lived here in Baghdad for 37 years. Our landlord came suddenly and told me, go together with your family and leave my house. Why? I don't know. We are suffering here in the heat, and because we cannot work. There is too much sorrow for my wife and son. In the night, we always hear shooting. Akram has come out of things relatively well, as a visit to the next tent shows. This woman gave birth 5 days ago. Her husband disappeared without a trace during the war. A Palestinian life often begins in a camp and often ends in a camp. The Palestinians have a joke about this. What does God do when a Palestinian goes to heaven? He immediately sets up camp. Khalid meets Mahmoud al-Shaya, who has a big problem, a lot of money, $136,000, which he earned as a crude oil chemist in Kuwait and has deposited at the wrong bank.
My money in the Jordan, in the bank of the Jordan. The name of the bank, Arabic Bank, in Central and Amman. Jordan government cannot enter me to the Jordan to take my money because I have Egyptian travel document. Jordan government cannot enter anybody who have this travel Egyptian document because this is the law.
Before we travel back, new letters are written. They are for the family members in the desert camps. We quickly stock up on petrol from a black marketeer. At 10 times the normal price, the petrol station opposite is dry. The only ones who seem to have no problem getting petrol are the Americans, who we repeatedly meet on the motorway. Maybe this is why they don't like it when they are filmed. Once again, we have to stop at a petrol station. The people gather full of hope at the petrol pump. Unfortunately, it is no use. It is not empty but broken. The repairman makes a start. We are also doing repairs. Our cooling system has sprung a leak. We patch it up with a t-shirt and an old car tire. After all the repairs are successfully completed, we see vigorous trading in American oil at the station shop. However, it is salad oil. Finally, after a sweat-soaked drive through the desert, we reach Abu Nawaf and his cats again. On the camcorder, we show him and his second wife the recordings of his son in Baghdad.
I'm happy and sad at the same time. Happy to see my son. Sad to be far away from him and his wife, children. Yeah. But this is life.
The last stop in our virtual family reunion. Al-Rashid, the refugee camp inside Jordan, where Nawaf's first wife, his daughter, and one of his sons live. Here too, filming and photography is strictly forbidden. The son, Walid Nawaf, first reads out the letters we have brought with us. Then naturally, we show them all the videos from Baghdad. I would like to live together with my children. It doesn't matter where. We want to live in peace. That is the only thing we want from God. I swear, it doesn't matter where God sends us. We will go, but never back to Iraq. We are afraid because there Palestinians are persecuted. While on the one hand dreaming of leaving, on the other they are adapting to the unavoidable. This refugee is counting on a long stay. As a precaution, she has started a kitchen garden.
Okay, so we saw
It's the anniversary of Colonel Muammar Gaddafi.
Okay, we'll get rid of our about Libya, and we are celebrating the anniversary of the American invasion of Iraq, and we see the profound impact it has on Palestinians in the refugee camps. Can I get to the link to Zoom? I already sent it out, Omar. So if you're not on my mailing list, please send an email to jtaylorbasker@gmail.com, and I will be happy to send you the link for next week. But you're willing to please write your comments on Facebook Live, and I'll be happy to share them. But right now I can't send you the link for Zoom, but I will in the future. So It's my email is J, the initial J, then Taylor, Taylor, and Basker, Basker, one word, jtaylorbasker@gmail.com. Send me an email. I'll put you on the list and you'll get the Zoom link next week. So we see the horrible situation for Palestinians in the Iraq War. So let's look a little bit at how this all evolved. What was the history of Palestine with Iraq? And I found this really great article on the internet. Thank God for the internet. Let me save some of my Arabic class lessons, and I'm going to read from it to you. And those of you on Facebook Live, you'll actually be able to see it, but I'm not going to share it on Zoom. So it's by it's called Iraq and the Israeli-Palestinian Conflict, and it's by Juan Cole. And so I'm going to read from it and then comment on it for the next 20 minutes or so for our program. So it starts out saying Iraq and Israel-Palestine may on the surface appear to be very different societies with little in common. Okay, Iraq is a huge nation and Palestine is a a small country that is fighting for its survival. Iraq has its Kurds, Sunni Arabs, and Shiites, and its modern history has been a struggle over monarchy, republicanism, and the one-party state. Whereas Israel and Palestine dogs barking. They hear dogs barking outside, and I have a spray bottle that I use to spray them. Quiet, dogs. Come on, Zoom Palestine. You're not allowed to bark. Quiet. Quiet. Rabbit. Quiet. I'll spray Clorox at you. Okay. All right, that calms them down. All right. So let me read it again. Iraq has Kurds, Sunni Arabs, and Shiites, and its modern history has been a struggle over monarchy, republicanism, and the one-party state. Whereas Israel and Palestine are Jewish. Okay, somebody just came on Zoom Palestine. Who is that? Farid. Hi, welcome, Farid. We just saw some very moving videos of the Palestinians during the Iraqi war in a refugee camp in Jordan, actually. And welcome also Raymond Turner. Hi, Raymond.
Hey,
and we
thank you.
Very good show on Mehdi Hassan. I don't know if you watch him. I watch him on MSNBC, who did this beautiful comparison of the invasion of Iraq and the invasion of Ukraine. It's really worthwhile. You can Google it and watch it. It was very good. And I'll make a YouTube of this program. So we're looking to see what the background is between Iraq and Palestine. So Israel and Palestine, meanwhile, are Jewish, Sunni Arab, and Christian Arab, and their central struggles have been in the shape of the Zionist state and the question of Palestinian statelessness. Iraq is a hydrocarbon state, while Israel and Palestine have diverse economies. The two can fruitfully be viewed through the same prism in two ways, though, although they're very different in their composition and history. On a comparative level, they share much in common, the multi-ethnic states with a background in Ottoman and British colonial administrative practices. Their fragility and ethnic instability have driven both internal civil wars and wars with neighbors. They have also had an important impact upon one another. So let's investigate how events in Palestine affected events in Iraq and vice versa. Okay, the rise of Zionism in the Middle East and the Arab rejection of it robbed Iraq of its vibrant and influential Jewish communities with faithful results. And there are many Iraqi Jews, I've met some of them here in New York, who were very prominent in Iraq and worked in government, and they had a very ancient, important Jewish community. But the conflict with the Palestinians and the eventually they had to flee Iraq. And it is also displaced thousands of Palestinians to Iraq. So then you had the reverse, where thousands of Palestinians had to flee to Iraq and hundreds of thousands to neighboring Kuwait. Now, Iraqi troops fought Israel, with Iraq supporting the Palestinian foes. The Palestinians of Kuwait then became further displaced by the Gulf War. My favorite cab driver, who's like my brother, I'm in Jordan, was a Palestinian who had to flee to Kuwait, and then they got kicked out of Kuwait. They were displaced by the Civil War. Those of Iraq had to flee to Jordan and Palestine after 2003. And the Israeli lobby in the United States was one important mover in fermenting the 2003 US overthrow of the Iraqi government, which propelled Iraq into chaos. And we all know about that story. Now, Iraq as a modern state was created by much the same process that brought into being Israel and Palestine. And this is where the connection is really interesting. In the 19th century, both Iraq, McAllister International, this is a footnote, both Iraq and Israel, Palestine consisted of a set of Ottoman administrative districts. So they were both part of the Ottoman Empire. And then they were both conquered by the British military during World War I, after the Ottoman Sultan threw in with Germany and Austria and declared war on the French, British, and Russian empires. Then they both were cobbled together in a colonial apparatus, first administered by the British Army, then reorganized as a League of Nations mandate. So same thing was going on to Palestine was going on to Iraq. British colonial policies of ethnic favoritism and divide and rule benefited the Sunni Arabs of Iraq and the Zionist settlers of Palestine. And the British are very responsible for these fake map of Iraq, where they created a nation of very different peoples that was doomed to failure due to the ethnic diversity, because rather than using the ethnic diversity as to create stability, the British were very good at divide and conquer. These policies argumentally had a very long-term impact in setting the stage for protracted civil wars, sometimes latent and sometimes hot, in both societies. Both illustrate the ways in which European colonialism profoundly shaped the modern Middle East, imposing the state frameworks within which ethnic competition was worked out. They also demonstrate how central the Israeli-Arab conflict has been to the fortunes of Middle Eastern governments. Now, the British, again, responsible for big problems. What did they do? Well, look back at history. The British made two promises during World War I with tragic consequences for the Middle East. What was it? Our friend, the Balfour Declaration of 1917, that pledged to create a Jewish homeland in Palestine, which the pompous commitment intoned would miraculously avoid inconveniencing what were to be more than 1 million native inhabitants by the same time the promise was fulfilled. And remember, a year earlier, the British Arab Bureau in Cairo had given Sharif Hussein, a Hashemite of Mecca, the impression that the British would support an Arab kingdom if the Arabs went into revolt against the British Empire. So here we go with the double speak of Britain. One year they say, okay, you help us fight the Germans and we'll make you an independent state. The next year, they give that state to the Zionists. At the same time, the Foreign Office in London was giving away Jerusalem to the Russians and Greater Syria to the French. Many people forget all this stuff while envisaging British dominance of Iraq and the rest of Palestine. Now, Lenin came to power in Russia and published the salacious details of the secret plot, pulling the new Soviet state out of it. They didn't want to be involved with this. The British on the ground were embarrassed about the double dealings and connived at allowing the Arab forces led by Abdullah's son Faisal to reach Damascus before the British as they pushed the Ottoman forces back. Faisal instantly claimed Syria, but when France invaded to claim its prize, Britain bestowed Iraq on Faisal in recompense, okay, because they had to give Syria to the French, so they're going to give Iraq to Faisal, making him king in Baghdad, okay, not asking the Iraqis what they wanted. His brother Abdullah was awarded the Transjordan by the British, who kept the West Bank and geographical Palestine for their mandate. Both Faisal and Abdullah were scions of the house of the Prophet Muhammad in Mecca, claiming a lineage that went back to their great-grandfather, Muhammad, and they were thus referred to as Hashemites. Now, so we have, the British divided everything up. They kept the West Bank, they kept Jordan, they gave Syria to the French, they gave Iraq to one of the Hashemite kings, the one who had initially conquered Syria. Then they gave Jordan to the Hashemite king. King Abdullah in Jordan and Faisal and his descendants in Iraq continued to dream of an Arab kingdom greater than the ones they possessed. They plotted to expand their realms when, as they foresaw must happen, the European mandates drew to a close. Iraqi leaders hoped to pick up Kuwait and Palestine when the British left, and Syria upon the French departure. Abdullah in Jordan had his eye on Palestine, Syria, and Lebanon. The Hashemites therefore found the British plan to give away Palestine to Central and Eastern European Zionist settlers extremely inconvenient because they wanted it for themselves. In Iraq, Faisal and his successor, King Ghazi, and the later successor, the regent Prince Abd al-Hah, all took strong stand against Jewish immigration into British Palestine and the potential displacement of the Palestinians it threatened to provoke. Now, they're not doing it because they love the Palestinians. They were doing it because they planned to take over. And this is at the root of the problem that the Arabs have within the Arab nation and the of not supporting Palestinian independence. And it all goes back to this. They all wanted Palestine for themselves. So there's this ongoing problem in the history of Palestine that they never get full support from other Arab countries. And this explains it. That's why history is so great. You gotta go back and read actually what happened to understand what's going on now. Okay, so the Iraqi pan-Arabists felt more strongly about this issue than did the politicians with a strictly Iraqi nationalist orientation. So the nationalist Iraqis didn't care about what was going on in Palestine, but the Iraqi pan-Arabists did because they wanted Palestine. Typical pan-Arab policy on this issue was outlined in interviews with the Egyptian press by Prime Minister Jamil Mifai in 1937, when he said, quote, "Palestine is part of Arabia, and we cannot agree to it being detached therefrom. We shall make every effort to see that the rights of our Palestinians." Now, what happens? Dogs, barking dogs in the hall, outside. Sending my dogs barking. All right, all dogs, stop barking. The door's closed. Quiet, dogs. So, Iraqi sent arms and money to Palestinians during the 1936-1939 revolt. It also sent delegations to diplomatic conferences on the future of Palestine, where it pressed this line. Okay, so we have a revolt in Palestine and Iraq supporting the Palestinians. Iraq had a further interest in the disposition of Palestine. Why? Oil, because of the oil pipeline in Haifa. And, you know, the more you read about the history, the more you see how much oil, Iraq's oil, is all guiding everything that goes on. So there was this new pipeline to Haifa to export oil from Iraq, which opened in 1935. Iraq not only had a policy towards Palestine, it had its own significant Jewish community, which we talked about a minute ago, estimated at 1/3 of Iraq's population. That's a lot of Jews, 1/3. And remember, these Iraqi Jews did not want to see a Zionist state. Most of the Jews in the communities around the Middle East all did not want a Jewish state. They did not want Israel founded as a Jewish state. They were against the founding of Israel because they knew it was going to cause trouble for them, and they were right. So 1/3 of the Baghdad's population are Jews, and Iraqi Jews until 1940 were for the most part uninterested in Zionism and instead considered themselves Arabs of Jewish heritage. Labor Zionism, with its emphasis on Jewish nationalism, socialism, and agricultural labor, developed in response to discrimination against Jews in Poland and Russia, where they were frequently forced into professions like peddling because they were forbidden to own much in the way of real estate. Whereas Baghdad's Jewish artisans, merchants, shopkeepers, and intellectuals had little interest in farm life. And many of those interested in socialism from 1936 gravitated to the Communist Party of Iraq with other Iraqi leftists. So the Jews were, many of them were in the Communist Party. Although Iraqi Jews faced occasional discrimination and a quota was instituted in the 1930s, setting the proportion of places they could take in the bureaucracy and schools, because a lot of them were very influential in the government. In interviews and as writers, they expressed fulfillment as citizens of Iraq. They thought of themselves as Iraqis, not Israelis. It is sometimes alleged that German anti-Semitism had an impact on places like Egypt and Iraq in the 30s. While some Iraqis were willing to seek political alliance with Axis powers on a pragmatic basis, there is no solid evidence, and I'm going to say this again because you hear this over and over again, that the Arabs were all backing the Nazis. And that's one of the reasons why, for the justification of Israel. And we've all heard this, so I'm going to say this again, that there is no solid evidence for the charge of ideological influence in contemporary mainstream newspapers or diplomatic accounts of German anti-Semitism. The British ambassador to Iraq, Basil Newton, observed in 1940 with respect to the Anglo-Iraqi Treaty of Alliance of 1930, the Nouri al-Said government, although it did not go so far as to declare war on Germany in September of 1939, it did at once take all the measures such as breaking off diplomatic and trade relations with Germany. Okay, so they don't go to war with Germany, but they break off trade relations with Germany. In interning German nationals and guarding the essential lines of communications, which they are obliged to take if they were to fulfill the obligations of the treaty. He observed that the main reasons for Baghdad's reluctance to declare war were a fear that the country's military was unprepared and an anxiety about being seen as a British satellite regime at a time when tensions were high over the Palestinian issue. So Iraq felt it wasn't prepared to go to war against Germany, and also because of the problems in the government, they could be seen as a British colonial satellite, and Iraq was trying to assert its independence. The idea of the Iraqi tribal Levites being sent to fight Germans on behalf of Britain also risked provoking unrest among the tribes of northern Iraq. Newton said that the German invasion of Poland produced a widespread revulsion in Iraq, and added, while not losing sight of their former conception of the Arabs chafing under the tutelage of the great Western democracies, the Iraqis recognized quite clearly the definite menace of Hitlerism and are anxious to see it defeated. When they saw it march into Poland, they realized that they were weak also, and that they were vulnerable for somebody who wanted to just march in and take them over. So they were anxious to see Germany defeated, although they hoped that Britain and France might find it expedient during or as a result of the war to accord full independence and self-determination to the Arabs of Palestine and Syria. So they did things that were anti-Nazi, anti-German, although they didn't join the war, hoping that when the war ended, that they would get independence in Palestine and Syria. Now, to the extent that Muslim and Christian Arabs grew suspicious of Jews in the late 1930s, the misgivings were fueled by the 1936-39 Palestinian revolt against the British policy of facilitating further Jewish immigration. Anti-colonialism, nationalism, and the Palestine issue in the minds of many in the Iraqi public. When Iraq's King Ghazi died in an automobile accident on April 4th, 1939, a crowd in the northern city of Mosul burned the British consulate and murdered the consul, convinced that the monarch's death had been plotted in London. So the Iraqis are extremely suspicious of the West still. The new consul, C.J. Summerhays, reported to Baghdad that, quote, "This town has an awkward population and the feeling is not generally friendly, owing mainly to propaganda about Palestine." He was convinced that the activities of the local Palestinian Defense League had a cumulative impact. Now, let's jump forward to 2003, where we're celebrating the invasion of, we're commemorating, not celebrating, commemorating with great grief. And there are many protest demonstrations going on right now as we speak. I was thinking of going up to the one at Times Square and interviewing people in the march, but I thought it was more important to go into the history of the connection between the Iraq invasion and Palestine. So let's roll back the clock and see how the whole thing happened and how it affected Palestine. So the neoconservative project for the new American century, which many of us know about, PNAC, established in 1997 by William Crystal and Robert Kagan, involved many of the authors of the, quote, clean break white paper. In case you haven't heard about it, listen. It had American military action against Iraq among its primary goals. 1997, okay? And its supporters pressured the Clinton administration to launch military operations. When George Bush came to power, and Clinton wouldn't do it. When Bush came to power in 2001, he, Vice President Dick Cheney, and Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld appointed many of the, quote, clean break authors and PNAC members to high positions throughout the Defense and State Departments and in Cheney's vice presidential staff. So this is the new project for the new American century. So now they've been seated inside of Bush's administration. From these perches inside the executive, they were able to collude with Iraqi expatriates to manufacture evidence that Saddam Hussein still had an active research program and stockpiles of weapons of mass destruction, and that his regime was directly connected to al-Qaeda. The neoconservatives were clearly obsessed with Israeli security. That obsession drove much of their case against Iraq, which was difficult to configure as a genuine threat to the United States. Now, the Israeli public overwhelmingly approved of the notion of war on Iraq. So Israel wants war on Iraq. And Prime Minister Ariel Sharon denounced Iraq to the Knesset as the biggest danger to the Zionist state. The outbreak of the Second Intifada in the fall of 2000 and the support that Saddam Hussein allegedly offered the families of suicide bombers sharpened Israelis concerned about Baghdad. Israeli radio reported in late 2002 that, quote, in recent weeks, Iraq has dramatically stepped up the transfer of funds to the territories. Since the beginning of the Intifada, Iraq has transferred tens of millions of dollars to the Palestinians to encourage terrorist attacks. While the Israeli lobbies and Israel itself strongly supported regime change in Baghdad, the effort was spearheaded by Bush and Cheney, both of whom had a background in the U.S. oil industry. It's always about follow the money. Given that the top decision makers had earlier been at odds with the Israeli lobbies over issues such as sanctions on Iran or the expansion of Israeli colonies in the West Bank, their alliance with the neoconservatives must have been seen as an instrumental new development from 2000 onwards. Thus, the American attack on Iraq is best understood as deriving from an alliance of U.S. petroleum interests with the Israeli lobbies. No news, right? The modern history of Iraq has been unusually shaped by foreign interventions, both direct and indirect. As an Arab Muslim country born of the Ottoman experience, but midwifed by the British Empire, it faced repeated British intervention in its domestic affairs. The Iraqi petroleum industry and Iraq's key strategic position as a route between the Mediterranean and the Persian Gulf, important to British communications with India until 1947, drove internal British interventions. The British project in Mandate Palestine of creating a homeland for Jews in a densely populated Arab region stoked growing passions in Iraq. The betrayal of the Palestinians by the British, as most Iraqis understood it, served as a constant reminder of Western perfidy and a poignant symbol for Iraqis' own resentments of being under London's thumb. The British and the Zionists misunderstood this growing nationalism in Iraq as intertwined with German or fascist influence, for which there is little convincing evidence, and which the reports of contemporary British diplomats generally call into question. So the Britain and France are blaming anti-Semitism and pro-fascism. And we're hearing that same story in Ukraine, aren't we? That they're neo-Nazis and fascists and all that. Rather, they were nationalists. They were Iraqi nationalists, as in Ukraine. They're not fascists and neo-Nazis, they're Iraqi, they're Ukrainian nationalists. So the parallels are really very striking. Rather, Iraqi elites in the 1930s and early in 1940s sought greater autonomy from Britain, including through somewhat negligible trade and diplomatic relations with Axis powers. The Iraqi masses sympathized with the Palestinians being displaced by the influx of Zionist colonialists. The attempt to move towards neutrality among the combatants in World War II was interpreted by British and Zionist observers as a pro-Nazi policy, although evidence for active support for Nazism as an ideology is lacking. There's no evidence. The British noted the British need for Iraqi petroleum, though, and the fear of having an important communications route to India cut off led them to virtually recolonize Iraq in 1941. The alliance of a powerful section of Iraqi elite with Britain, exemplified by Emir Abd Ilah, and sometimes Prime Minister Nouri al-Said became increasingly unpopular, in large part because of the events in Israel and Palestine from 1948 forward. The rise of Israel and the expulsion of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians from their homes created a backlash against Iraqi Jews that ultimately deprived the country of an important force for multiculturalism and cosmopolitanism. Baghdad's refusal to intervene on Egypt's side in 1956 contributed powerfully to the discontents that produced the 1958 coup and popular uprising that ended the pro-British monarchy. Likewise, the limited Iraqi government involvement in the 1967 war and the humiliating defeat inflicted on Arab forces by the Israelis paved the way for the 1968 Ba'athist coup against the Arif clique and enter Saddam Hussein. The turn of Iraq from pro-Western monarchy to Iraqi and Arab nationalism was not solely caused by public passions on the Palestinian question, but the latter was one important catalyst for this sea change. So the overthrow of the Iraqi monarchy, pro-Western, pro-British monarchy, part of it was people were upset about what was going on in Palestine. From 1968 onwards, the Ba'ath government was largely in synchrony with public opinion in Iraq on the Palestinian-Israel conflict and on the question of imperialism. So that Saddam Hussein and the Ba'ath Party are pro-Palestinians. Okay, wait and see what happens now. Iraq's nationalization of the oil industry in 1972 and its vigorous participation in the 1973 war on Syria's side bolstered its Arab nationalist credentials. Ba'ath modernization and industrialization drives racist standards of living in Iraq. And the oil price revolution in the 1970s abruptly made Iraq into a wealthy, rapidly developing regional power, getting rich and strong. So they got to go. With Egypt neutralized after the 1978 Camp David Accords, Iraq emerged as the leader of the Arab bloc and one of the few military powers that could hope to challenge Israeli hegemony in the Levant. Israel responded to the Iraq challenge by bombing the Osirak reactor and by forming an alliance of convenience with Iraq's primary enemy, Khomeini Iran. Despite strident rhetoric on Israel, however, the Ba'ath regime mainly spent blood and treasure on a quest for aggrandizement through the conquest of territories and the acquisition of petroleum resources from its two neighbors, Iran and Kuwait. Whatever support Saddam Hussein may have sometimes given the Palestinians, his reckless invasion of Kuwait and the subsequent expulsion of Palestinians from that country did more to weaken them as a financial and political force than anything since their expulsion from Israel in 1948. And most people don't know about the history of the expulsion of the Palestinians from Kuwait. It was brutal. It was horrible. I spoke with many people in Jordan, many Palestinians in Jordan who survived it. It was a total atrocity caused by Saddam Hussein's invasion. Saddam Hussein's decision to fire Scud missiles at Israel in January 1991 in hopes of drawing Israel into the war against him and thereby breaking up the alliance of the United States and the Arab League against his annexation of Kuwait may well have sealed his doom. Along with his subsequent financial support for Palestinians, this action convinced the Israeli lobbies in the United States and important segments of the Israeli elite and public that Ba'athist Iraq formed the greatest menace to Israel in the region, and that only regime change could ensure the survival of the Zionist state. Ba'athist threats, backed by missiles that could reach Israel, and a record of attempting to develop chemical, biological, and nuclear weapons formed an element in the psychological dimension of the Arab-Israeli conflict. The long shadow cast by Baghdad had the potential to spur Israeli immigration or slow immigration from the former Soviet Union. Ba'athist Iraq's financial support for the Palestinians may not only have enabled guerrilla and terrorist attacks, but also stiffened Palestinians' resolve and made it less likely that Palestinians would leave the West Bank because of economic desperation. While Iraqi involvement in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict was only one impetus for the 2003 American war on Iraq, the Israeli lobbies played an important role in fomenting the war that opened a new chapter in Iraqi history. Palestine, Iraq, and Israel have been profoundly intertwined in modern history. The idea that, quote, the road to peace in Jerusalem runs through Baghdad, promulgated by the neoconservatives in early 2003, was among the more profoundly wrong political slogans ever manufactured in history. The road to peace in Jerusalem runs through Baghdad. That regime change, war, and political instability in Iraq have frequently been deeply influenced and sometimes even driven by the Israeli-Palestinian struggles, however, seems irrefutable. So now we have this article, Juan Cole, I recommend it. It's 22 pages. I didn't read the whole thing to you, but it's full of fascinating information. And I welcome all of you. I'll put a link to it on you know, when I make the YouTube. So it's just there's so many levels of perfidy in this. So Farid and Nat, what do you think? What's your response to this information?
I mean,
were you aware of the relationship? Were you aware of the relationship between the Palestinians and the Iraqi war?
Yeah, the Iraqi war caused a lot of damage to the Palestinians, especially in Kuwait. A lot of Palestinians had to be moved out of Kuwait, and like you said, it was ugly. It caused a lot of pressure on Jordan as well. A lot of Palestinians were very comfortable in Kuwait. And when we sided with Saddam Hussein, especially Arafat, it was a wrong move to do. And it set us back, real back. I mean, I met with a lot of Jordanian Palestinians in Jordan, and they're not as well off as they used to be in Kuwait. So, I mean, your information is very amazing. But that's where I'm at.
Where are you?
I'm saying, you know, with Iraq and Bush, and we're not, we keep going backward instead of forward.
Yeah. My cab driver, Ayman, you remember him, you met him in Jordan. He had a barbershop, and very prosperous barbershop in Kuwait. And then they were kicked out, and now he's a taxi driver, making much less money with much less prestige and stuff. It's just so tragic. I mean, it's like the Palestinians are cursed or something. I mean, it's just they can't get rest. And what happened at the end of the war now, and I don't think you saw the videos I showed at the beginning, but the Palestinians in Iraq now had to flee because they got blamed for being supporters of Saddam Hussein. So now the new Iraq wants to punish the Palestinians so that they have fled or they're living in very precarious situations because of the support. They're blamed for being a supporter of Saddam Hussein. It's just mad. It's so difficult. Nat, what's your take on it? Can you unmute yourself and share what you think about all this?
Well, I'm just appreciative of the information you presented. It's all new to me, and what Farid had to say, it's all news to me. So I was just listening and learning, and it's very complicated stuff on one level, and then on another level, it isn't so complicated, and then the historical role, and then the historical role of the Brits with their mastery of divide and rule was, that was really informative.
Yeah. And like when I read that article, I was shocked at how early the conservatives in 1997 were plotting to get rid of Iraq, of Saddam Hussein Iraq, and
back how far? What did you say?
97.
97.
Yeah.
So, well,
they didn't do it till 2003, but they they seated people in the government, in Bush's government, to get this to happen. And AIPAC, Israel lobby, was behind it as well.
Yeah, I actually saw a film. I can't remember the title of it, but one of the military personnel, actually a female, she pointed out how they had this like to-do list: Iraq, Iran, Syria, Libya, and they were just checking them off, and so that was all part of a very detailed plan by the neocons, like Wolfowitz and Pearl and those folks.
It was just frightening how these people got into the power and decision making in the government, and it shows how our system of democracy is, that everybody is saying now is in danger, but it's been in danger for a long time. It's had a lot of loopholes and places for people to infiltrate, and AIPAC has been extremely skilled at this. The Zionist lobby in this country is amazingly adept at this. All right, who's somebody? Okay, Nat, I'm just reading your note. You said it might be worthwhile to check out this interview with Yulia Yurchenko. She acknowledged the existence of neo-Nazis, but does not inflate their role and influence. Thank you for that. This is typical of countries that, of people who want to create an excuse for invasion. And the other thing I often say is, and I've had experience with this traveling in Europe with anti-Semitism. All of Europe, especially Eastern Europe, has a lot of neo-Nazis and a lot of anti-Semitism. And to say suddenly it's this one group in Ukraine that's worse than the rest of them is totally untrue. They're all over Europe, especially in Eastern Europe. When I was visiting my son, who was a student in England, and I was riding the underground, the subway, there were a bunch of skinheads sitting in the car with us, and they could tell we were Americans. They could hear us talking. They said, "Where are you from?" And we said, "Oh, we're from New York. What's your name?" And my son's name is Isaac, where his father's Jewish. And so we said, "Yeah, he's Isaac. I'm Jackie, and we're from New York." He said, "Oh," they said, "Oh, you're from Jew York." And they started harassing us because we were from Jew York. This is in England, in London. It's crazy, stupid skinheads on the train. So all of this that, it's just Ukraine that has this terrible problem of anti-Semitism is BS, because it's all over Europe. It's a problem that has to be addressed. And one of the things I've been saying for years, that the more Israel does horrible stuff, the worse anti-Semitism is going to get, because every Jew on the planet is going to be blamed for what Israel is doing. Now, I have tons of Jewish friends in New York, and none of them support the occupation. They're all in, Jewish Voice for Peace and Rabbis for Human Rights and all that. They all hate the occupation. They hate the Israeli government, and none of them are for. They're pro-Palestinian, but they will be blamed by anti-Semites, for what Israel is doing. And I've said this, that Israeli policies does not create safety for Jews, but rather the opposite. It makes the world less safe for Jews, because Jews around the world are going to get blamed for what Israel does, and we see that now. So it's just very upsetting to understand how people twist facts and twist reality. So I know you're working on a poem. Nat, do you have a poem to share with us?
Yeah, I do actually. And I just wanted to say before that that I highly recommend the link that I attached. She's a young professor she's Ukrainian, and she's also spent time in the UK. I think she teaches out of the UK, and she actually went back to the Ukraine to join the resistance there, So,
all right. Well, I've got it. We have it on our
sure.
Copy it just in case I I lose it.
Okay. Anyway, this piece is called "A War Is Not a War," and I woke up one morning and I thought of the Dionne Warwick song where she starts the chair is not a chair. So it made me think of this time. Quote, "Truth is the first casualty of war." That's a quote from Philip Snowden, and it's also attributed to Hiram Johnson and others as well, I might add.
Around a while, right? Yeah.
Somewhere there's bombing, not where you are. Somewhere there's bombing, maybe Kandahar. Somewhere skies rain artillery shells nonstop, night and day, day and night. Twisted, tortured, rebar bones of high rises surrender as pulverized prisoners. Windows, doors, and floors are crushed with concrete dust and debris on rubble-strewn streets, slippery with blood, brain, and guts, near scorched Swiss cheese cars. Somewhere there's shelling, not where you are. Somewhere there's shelling, maybe Côte d'Ivoire. Somewhere haunting, wailing, and moaning punctuates puzzles under shells of burnt out buildings. Do empty shoes and sandals, limbless torsos, decapitated bodies offer clues to where it is? Does viscosity of the blood inform us? What about bloody blankets, the bent blue bike, books and papers? Is it Palestine, Yemen, Ukraine? Is it Tripoli, Kabul, or Baghdad? Addis Ababa or Aleppo? Any tips from the rhythms and inflections of cries? Does rattling wheels of refugee luggage offer a clue? Somewhere there's killing, not where you are. Somewhere there's killing, maybe Myanmar. Call it an operation, non-invasive outpatient procedure. Call unscheduled surgeries, medical mishaps, leave amputees and decapitated patients for loved ones to mourn, and the mass gravediggers to bury. Address medicine men as Dr. Goebbels, as they put patients on low-calorie diets of unknown knowns and known unknowns. Call pre-op scrubbing the airwaves of blowing in the wind, peace train. Imagine infection control. Then declare the friendship train ain't running. You're either with us or you're with the enemy, and truth will get you 15 instead of setting you free. A war is not a war. It's a special military operation, landmass amputation. It's manifest destiny. It's a desert chill, a desert storm for enduring freedom during Q2 through Q4. And it's not personal, it's business. Our Saturday marches plant tiny seeds, small, stubborn possibilities. May we learn to cast our lots with lunch bucket crowds. Remember the essential ones, the ones who one day will say, enough. We too are ILWU, Local 10. We refuse to lend magic of our hands to merchants of death. We refuse to load and unload WMD. And could that be the day? The day that body armored workers join in, turning tools with triggers on grifter generals, bloodlusting bosses.
Wow, thank you.
Oh, wow.
Mhm.
I'm in tears. I really not, you really hit it. You hit it.
Really?
Hope you're going to publish that poem. I've got tears coming out of my eyes. You hit it. I hope you publish that poem, and I'm extremely grateful that you shared it with us.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm.
Wow. Yeah. It's the madness. I try to think of humanity as still at a low state of evolution, and that eventually something good will come out of all this evil and bring us together to a higher level consciousness and humanity. We just pray for the future. Thank you, Nat. That was really amazing.
Thank you. Thank you for doing what you're doing. It's much appreciated because, you know, I think the requisite for anything progressive coming out of all of this is knowledge, and all of us developing our consciousnesses, raising it to higher levels that are required for dealing with these particular this particular set of circumstances. It calls on all of us to try and up our game, so to speak.
Right, and it makes you more confident.
Yes.
When you have the knowledge, when you
it does
understand how things happen, because I get into debates with friends in person and on Facebook, and it's very discouraging. What's most discouraging to me is that when you present facts to people, they don't want to believe them. So that's when you just say, okay, that's it. No point in arguing. But for people who have an open mind, I think giving them the information is really helpful.
Right. And one thing I just wanted to add, your link, the professor that I put in the link, that she was talking about, and as were several other people that I've listened to over the last few days, have talked about the in addition to the shooting war that's going on, there's the war of propaganda, the war of misinformation, disinformation,
Oh, wow,
half truths, and big lies.
I was just arguing with a friend last night who comes from Russian background, said, oh, it's all being exaggerated. It always belonged to Russia. And I said, no, it was a kingdom way before there was such a thing as Russia. He said, oh, well, that was a long time ago. And Russia needs it's a breadbasket for Russia. They should just give it to her, surrender to Russia. Like people don't want facts about anything, they just, Farid, what do you have to say? Do you have anything to share with us?
Yeah, I want to share with you something you were talking about, Balfour and European and Iraq and the knocking. We've left home a long time ago, exile, forced, and I've always imagined myself going back to my father's house of 48 and knocking on it. So I wrote knocking. I'm facing a door in a velvet sky, tormented, besieged, hoping someone will let me in. Still knocking on Balfour's head, not Clapton style, knocking on heaven's door, but rather Roger Waters style, also muddy water style. 200 years of slavery. And God bless America. Not really. Finally, a European woman answered the door. She was shouting, what do you want? Oh, it's you again. Didn't I tell you to get lost? There is nothing left for you here. I replied, yes, it's me again. I brought the rest of my family. I will always knock. I will always come back. I mean, we never left. Knocking on Balfour's head. I wrote this poem in London.
Wow.
I was in a conference, and some Zionists disrupted the whole thing, and it was about Balfour. Wow. And it was very scary. They were right behind me when they erupted.
Oh, wow.
So I wrote this poem, knocking.
Thank you for sharing that. It's very, especially when we read again about how the Balfour Declaration screwed not only Palestine, but the whole Middle East and Iraq, so thanks for sharing that. It's a history that's so painful. And what I love about your poem knocking is because I learned of the importance of keys for Palestine, and in Ramallah, in the center of the city, there's a big sculpture of a key in the square that, and all of my Palestinian students in Jordan all had keys to their homes in Palestine. And the key is such an important symbol, and I was never aware of that until I went to Jordan, that, like you said, you never left, so thank you for sharing that poem. Is it published anywhere?
Yes, it's in the book, Screaming Olives.
Oh, it's in Screaming Olives. Okay. I'll have to look at it. So, well, thank you everybody for being together. Thank you, Dorothy, for being with us, and we'll see what happens this week in the world. And Nat, I'd love to. Are you planning to publish that poem? What's your plan for your poem, Nat?
Oh yeah, I'm going to. It'll be. we'll see, because well, it would be published. It's already in some circles already, but I'm trying to. Actually, I'm working on my first book. That's the big thing,
Wow, good for you. Well, send us a link to that poem so we can
I'll
share the text.
I'll send it to you. when we get off. And
All
thank
right,
you again
we have
for
about
thank you again for pulling everyone together. And are you going
I
out
never
to the go ahead.
pull it off to the demonstration. No, I have to visit a friend who had a hip transplants.
Oh, okay.
So I have to do a work of mercy. She wants me to come and visit her and bring her a muffin. She's in village care, so I'll do that. I can only do so much.
Right.
So, but anyhow, so I'm sending everybody love, and I never know. I apologize for sending the notice out so late, but I never know if I'm going to be able to pull off something. It's hard to get people to come on and get interviewed, and and things keep happening. And then I have crises in my life, yada yada yada. But anyhow, somehow God gives me the strength to pull it off. So far, so good.
And it's good to see Fareed again too.
Yeah.
See you, Nate.
Fareed, come by and see me. I have a new roommate from Lebanon who you would love. So come and visit me, and he's helping me clean my house up, which is great. You'll be very impressed. Okay, masalami, everybody. Thank you for
Take
all the
care,
5
you guys.
people on.
Have a good weekend. Stay
You too.
safe.
Bye-bye.